Hey, this is Professor Homa. Welcome to Ex12. We're going to be doing a redesign of the Janine Weike site. The last exercise that we worked on, we kind of recreated their site with a background image, with a kind of main section with drop shadow. We use this banner image in the middle, and what we're going to do is do a redesign, kind of add some more kid colors to it, make it pop a little bit more, add a little more white to it. And this is kind of what I had in mind when I started doing a redesign. I created a whole different header for this. Instead of working with this graphic, was a little hard to work with. Even a larger version that I found of it online still wasn't the most modern looking kind of graphic. The hand-drawn looked kind of old-fashioned. Didn't kind of work with what they were trying to do here. I did try to keep the pediatric dentistry kind of element with the different colors. I recreated that in Photoshop with kind of a chalkboard font, and I kept the different colors, even though I don't like using different letters as a different color. It kind of followed what they were doing, and I didn't want to change it too much. This Janine Weike with the last name real big, was part of something that I saw on their Facebook site. Instead of the kind of illustration, I used a real picture of kind of a variety of kids here that pops. Has a lot of the colors that we're using in our layout. Has the blue, it has pink, so I kind of used some of those colors. I kept the light blue as more of the kind of the primary color, is in addition to the dark blue that they use for their background or their logo. Used a little lime green as an accent because that's in here too. I even used a little bit of the orange kind of as a muted kind of background color too. So I tried to do something that has a little more pop. Now what we're going to be doing with this site is first developing a homepage. Now you can have some flexibility as far as what you want to do as far as fonts and colors and things like that. You don't have to lay out exactly like this, but you might want to follow the basic structure. But what we're going to do is we're going to make it responsive so that when you resize it, it's going to start off at one single size. It's 960 pixels to start, but as you resize it, it's actually going to use these two elements in the middle as percentages so that they stay fluid, that they still kind of use up that space but kind of take a percentage of that space. So we're going to use percentages for those sizes, the widths of those sections that are inside there, and then when it gets to a certain point, after this point, when it gets to a certain point, we'll eventually make it one column so that it would be kind of showing up the way it would show up on a phone, and we'll basically kind of hide the top area and show the address at the bottom. We'll also move the sidebar area down to the bottom as well. Now, as far as this layout goes, we're going to keep the navigation across the top like the original one had. It had a home. I took out the advanced services and just made it services, and also took out the payment area and put it in the sidebar. If you look over here, we have this kind of sidebar here, kind of like in WordPress. They'll have kind of a widget sidebar element, and we're going to do that too, and it'll be floated on the right side of our page. So this will be floated left. This can be called floating left or right, it doesn't matter. As long as it's floating, it means you're taking it out of the HTML flow. So it can still float left. It's just floating left of whatever's after it. Whatever is after it is not going to have a float. So this could be left or right. So anyway, and this will have a certain percentage, and I wanted to kind of go through this, and I'll show you some of the CSS as I do. Now, you're going to be given an HTML page which will have a lot of this done. What you're going to have to do is actually just put in the ID names based on the CSS. But before we do that, let me just show you the CSS that I have here. We're going to wipe out the margin and padding. We're going to put a background color. This is the peach color. We're going to set the body width of 960 pixels, and eventually it'll be a percentage. We're also going to center it using margin auto. Give it a background color of white. That's just the content that has the white color in the background. The HTML, remember, is behind the body. We're going to have two header sections. I made two header sections. I made a header with an idea of address top or address top, and a header banner. So if you look at the layout, this is the header address top, and this is the header banner, and this is a nav section, the nav top section that we have here. Now I set this up so that eventually this can go away, and we'll basically put an address at the bottom, because it's always a hassle the way this wraps. It looks nice when it's on a single page, but then when it wraps, it looks odd when it goes on two lines. So we actually set up a section that's actually on separate lines that'll be at the bottom. So then when it gets to a certain size, we get rid of that. We go down to the bottom, and now it's just stacked and centered at the bottom, which looks nicer than worrying about how those line breaks with those little vertical slashes in between. So we're going to do that. Also, going through this, I just want to show you some of the sizes of this. Our size I mentioned is the width is 960 pixels. This header image is 960 by 240. So this banner section and the header image is 960 by 240. And that's the way we're going to start, and it's going to center on the page using margin auto, that body section. And these sections, both the header address top and the nav sections, will basically just have padding around them to create the space. They're not set at a certain height. There's just padding on the top and bottom, and there's also padding on the left and right of these. Now, as we move down, one thing I want to point out as far as these is we have one container section, which is going to be called section with an ID of container, and it's going to have a 2% padding, meaning it'll be 2% around all sides. This is 2%, and where I got that 2% is basically taking 16 pixels like one of our other exercises and dividing by the total width. So 16 divided by 960 was like 1.6%, and then I increased it to like 20 pixels. So it got somewhere around 2% is a pretty good margin. You could go a little more, but that seemed to work out okay. So we're going to go with 2%. So you have to keep that in mind when we do some of our work here. Now, because it's a container, and I wasn't sure about this in the beginning, but because the section is a container, the elements inside the container will have to add up to 100. They do not have to subtract the 2% of the container. So originally I was doing that, but you don't have to. The element, because what we're going to do is put this one at 20%, and I wanted to have this article section, its article homepage, at 80%. Well, I can't have that at 80% because we have extra space in here. And remember, you always have to subtract the spacing. So if this is 80% and this is 20%, something has to give. And what's going to give is there's also 2% padding in this kind of nav side section. There's 2% in here. So there's basically what we're going to have to add up to 100. If you had 20 and if you had 80, and then if you added 2% here and then 2% here, that would be an extra 4%. And then I even had an extra 8% as a gutter that I added, kind of a margin left, so that there'd be some space in between here. They wouldn't be running right up against each other. So there's going to be an extra 8% and an extra 4%. That's an extra 12%. We're over 100 right now. So what I did is subtract it from this. So this article section is going to be 68%. And if I look at the CSS and I go down to homepage, you can see I set the width at 68%. And it's going to float left. That's basically the 80% subtracting the 12%. And the nav side, you can see I have this at 20%. Where's the nav side? Here's my width is set for 20%, and there is a padding 2%, and there's a margin left 8%. Now there's only on the left side, that's 8, and then the padding that's all around on the left and right makes it 4. So that's where I get that 12% that I had to subtract from this one. And again, it does not include the 2% over here because that's the container. So what's inside the container, article and nav side, has to add up to 100%. So I'm subtracting 8, subtracting 4, and all of these add up to 100%. This thing is basically what's inside of this section, this article section. There's an H1 and H2, this while creating healthy smiles, a paragraph, and you can see it has some margin above or margin top. And then this is actually a paragraph down here. It has line breaks in it, but it's one paragraph and it has some margin above. It even has padding and a background color. You can do that with a paragraph. If I look at that paragraph that I have in here, it's an H3, and it basically has a margin top. That's the space above it. I increased the line height a little bit because there's only line breaks in there. And it also has a background color and a border radius and all that. So that's just a paragraph that, remember, they don't have to be sections. You can add round corners and a background color and padding to one single paragraph, because a paragraph or H3 is a paragraph and it's a block element. So you could do all those things to a block element, to a header element. So that's how that's set up. Now going back to my page, again, we have header address top. And then there's also another header called banner, and then there's my nav top and an ID of top, and then we have our section container, which contains basically these two elements, which is the article home page, I called it, because we may have an article for other pages that'll have a little bit different layout. That's why I set that up, because we are going to make different pages. And then there's the navigation or nav side over here that basically has links in it. It has padding in here. It also has a round corner. And then at the bottom, we basically have a little copyright section that takes place. So this copyright section is going to be where the float is going to be broken, because these two things float. This floats left or right, and then the float ends so that this doesn't try to float to the left or right of the following element. This breaks it. So we're going to have a clear left over here, or a clear both, actually. So if we look through the CSS a little bit, you know, I'm not going to give you the CSS. You're going to have to put in the element, but we start with our HTML body. We looked at that. Here's our header sections. And the reason I have display block in there, which I have explained in your other CSS, is so we're going to actually display none when we want it to disappear. So we want to display property there, so we can change it from block to none when we use our media queries. Our banner is set for 240, and our image is going to be 960 by 240. So that's our header image that we put in there. We have our navigation in the top. It has one kind of containing nav top element, and then it's basically a list, a bullet list, and we put it on one line. We take away the bullets, and then we kind of style the individual elements, which we've done with Ex6 and some other exercise where we've kind of worked with buttons a little bit. So, you know, they're set up so they have their own kind of their own font. They have padding around it, and they even have a hover background color, which is what we see. You know, this nav section, if you hover over it, it has a background color. That's why whatever padding you put on the top and bottom of the nav top, you also have to put the same padding on the top and bottom of the nav top links, which are the A links. And let me just show you where that is. These A links, you can see there's padding. It says 0.7% and it has 1%. Remember, top and bottom is 0.7%. 1% is on the left and right. And that 1% is something where I just kind of had to nudge it over a little bit. But also up here for nav top, that has a 0.7%. That means they have to be the same so that that hover appears over the same area. And I'll go over that a little bit later, but we've done that already with our buttons. And again, all these have IDs. It has an ID homepage because we may have other pages. And actually, like I said, we are going to make other pages. We're going to end up making and I'll show you the original site, we're going to make a Meet the Team page. And we're going to use anchor links so we can actually link to the different people without having to scroll all the way down. We'll make anchor links so they kind of jump to the person that you want to see instead of having to scroll through everybody. Also, we're going to do a testimonials page, which we'll use like a block quote style that'll be able to put this all in kind of a look like this or something similar. We're going to do a hours and location page, which will be pretty easy. There's not a lot of content here. There'll just be a map, which we can copy and paste from Google Maps. The Contact Us page. Now, they have a Contact Us page. They don't even have an email link on here. We'll make sure we put an email link. If we have time, we'll copy and paste some contact form information to put a form in there, because that's usually what you see on a Contact Us page. So we are going to build this out to multiple pages. You'll have 5 pages total, but to start, you only need to be concerned about the home page at first, because that's where the bulk of the work will be done. What we will have once we're going to change the percentages of these once we start to resize it, and again, that blue border is just when we have it selected, so that there's 2 breakpoints. Here's the first breakpoint, which actually widens this a little bit so it doesn't look so narrow, because I didn't want this sidebar so narrow. It makes it a little bit more like 2 columns. It's almost like a 2/3 instead of 3/4 kind of proportion. And then when you get to a certain point, I think like around 520, it basically snaps into 1 column, like it would be on a phone, like you'd read it single column on a phone. You know, holding it vertically. So that's what's going to happen then. And then also that top address disappears and this bottom address appears. And that's done through the media queries and just telling one to display block and one to display none. So that everything kind of becomes 100. Everything becomes 100%. The floats go away. These become 100%. Notice there's still the 2% from the section. That's from the section 2% that's in there. These don't have any. They go right to the edge, so they're not inside that section portion. So that's kind of what we're going to be doing. So this is just kind of an overview from the start. I'll give you some CSS, like kind of a blank CSS to work with, so you at least have the elements there. You're going to have to put in the properties and the values, and the HTML will be pretty much done for you. You're just going to have to link up the CSS page, and you're also going to have to put put in the IDs so you have the correct IDs in there. So you could use the CSS to figure out what the IDs. That way I wanted you to make sure that you looked back and forth and you knew what the IDs were instead of me just putting them in there. I wanted you to be very careful about how you type them, because that's all a part of laying out a web page. So the IDs that you use here have to match up with the IDs that are in here. So all these header ID, I took those out and I want you to put them in so that you know exactly what sections are what sections when you start working on it. So that'll be the next step, and I'll get you started with that. But a lot of this you're going to do on your own because it's kind of a review of what we've done all semester. So hopefully there'll be elements of other exercises that you've done when you start working on this, other than putting together the other pages. But I'll add some more videos as the rest of the project kind of comes together. But let's focus on the home page to start.